A very good evening and welcome to KIVUMBI 2022. We are broadcasting live from the Standard Group headquarters along Mombasa Road. And tonight, like every other Monday, we have a topic of discussion, a topic that will relate to the normal happenings in every election cycle, the media and the election. A very important topic because this is where it begins, because it's the responsibility of the media to tell you what's happening. Now, this is our newsroom where all the stories you get in the papers, online, or even on TV are channeled from. My name is Ken Mijungu and welcome to KIVUMBI 2022 once again. And one of the most important calendar event in the history of the nation is the election, the general elections. Now, this is one of the few events, if not only the only one, that brings the nation together. It is also one of the most divisive and polarizing events in the calendar. In Kenya, the general elections have often reflected the psyche of the nation, and the outcome is no doubt an issue of life and death for many politicians, and this is why protecting its integrity is key and is important. One of the players at the center of its protection is the media. Now, the Fourth Estate plays a key role in ensuring free, fair, transparent, and of course, verifiable process. So tonight, we shine the spotlight on ourselves. What is the wider role of the media during the electoral process, and how has it played that wider role? Are there shortcomings, areas that need to be improved on? I will be speaking to Victor Bwire from the Media Council of Kenya between now and 9 p.m. I'll also be taking you through the year, back to the year 1992, when the space for media to operate expanded. We also have what the law says about the media and the electoral process, specifically Article 34 of the Constitution. Before then, Akisa.
All right, of course, and Ken, as you rightly put it, in 9 months' time, the media will be called upon to rise up to the occasion and once again play their pivotal role. The IEBC is seeking to create a framework to involve the media in the electoral process instead of leaving them to their own devices. Now, the media is increasingly becoming innovative on how to ensure accurate and timely information gets to you, and occasionally it falters. We seek tonight to dig deeper into this symbiotic relationship as we tell you our own story through the eyes of Jerotich Sei, who's a humanitarian development consultant, likes to refer to herself as an active citizen, David Mekali, who's an editorial consultant, and Patrick Gadhara, the curator-in-chief of The Elephant. They'll be joining us for that panel discussion at 10 p.m. And of course, we'll be picking up a lot on some of the things Victor Bwire here will say in the interview coming up shortly, and especially touching on the election guidelines for members of the press as we approach the 2022 polls. But first, I'll be coming up to you right up at 9 p.m. with the day's news stories. Let me hand you over to Ken as we continue with our wall-to-wall coverage of the media's role in elections and democracy. Ken.
All right, and Sophia Wanuna is away, so I will be speaking to Victor Bwire, Director of Media Training and Development at the Media Council of Kenya. That in a bit, but first, let's take you through the numbers. Let's look at the figures. Let's take you back to 1992, but before then, let's rank the position of media freedom against the global position, and Kenya ranks at position 102 globally. That's where Kenya ranks globally in terms of media freedom, and you'd want to know which country comes first, we'll be telling you. But apart from the ranking, the mainstream media has seen several changes over the years. And let's begin with the changes, and the slow growth of the media was witnessed before 1992 multi-party system. You know, before then, it was only one-party state, and there was a stifling of the voice of the media. Now, the growth of the media outlets was seen exponentially after 1992. This was where more FM stations were registered, and later on, TV stations, more TV stations were also registered. Right now, there's a lot in the country. You can't even count them if you wanted. Now, one of the changes that happened then was the arbitrary arrests of journalists decreased significantly after 1992, and more voices, both public and private, were allowed in the media and they were utilized. So whether you're serving in the government then or you're a private citizen, your voice was likely to be heard in the media after 1992. So let's take you back to some of the events that defined the life of the media. And the first stop is 2006. What happened in 2006? There was an attack on the Standard Group. now masked men armed with assault rifles walked into Standard Group, and of course there were journalists who were beaten at that time, and copies set on fire. That was, copies of newspaper were set on fire, and of course KTN was switched off temporarily at that time. That was the year 2006, when the media first faced a major hurdle as mainstream media. Of course, still in 2006, journalists were accused of subversion, printing information that were contrary to what was expected, and the government also claimed the media was a threat to national security. These were some of the reasons that made them do whatever they did, and 3 journalists at that time were charged with alarming publications. That was 2006. Let's fast forward to 2013, about 7 years later. What happened in 2013? President Uhuru Kenyatta, at one of the press conferences, described the newspapers as used to wrap meat. Actually, a lot of you still refer to newspapers as meat wrappers, or people write newspapers as meat wrappers. But that was in 2013. Of course, there's been media laws and election coverage, which is very important, and we need to look at that. Now, we have to break it down to responsibilities. We will start with responsibility to the citizen. Now, it has duty to the citizens. As the media, we have duty to you. Of course, we have duty to the political candidates, or the candidate contesting under Article 38. And of course, there is the wider duty now to the nation, which is very important and at the center of it. Of course, with this, there must be some values that have to accompany this. The media, there's a demand for the media to be accurate and fair. And that is one of the things that they accuse the media of, not being accurate, not being fair. They have to be objective, and confidentiality of the sources, the people who give us some of these stories you read or watch on television. We owe them a duty of confidence. Of course, the values still apply. The right to reply, we have to give you a right to reply if need be, and if we say something about you that you need to reply to, that right of reply is a must. There must be integrity, and the media is contained. They can't publish obscene stuff or obscene publications. You can't see them in the media. That's the duty we owe you. And of course, there's duty to privacy right at the top of the values that the media houses must have. Now, there's also the role of state-owned media. Now, state-owned media, I'll first tell you who are the state-owned media. The first one is the Kenya News Agency. You know about it, and you know about Kenya Broadcasting Corporation and My Government. These are outlets owned by the government and serve the purpose of the citizens equally, because they can't discriminate. It's a government, it's a public utility. Now, the obligation of the state-owned media to elections: provide fair and balanced election coverage, afford the opportunity for the presentation of divergent views and dissenting opinions to all and sundry. Anyone who's running for political office, KBC owes you this obligation. The other obligations that the state-owned media have is KBC, for example, in consultation with the IEBC, must allocate free airtime to registered political parties and, of course, registered politicians and individuals running for office. That's an obligation to KBC, which also has a responsibility to educate you as a voter and keep you informed throughout the electoral process. An express provision of the media. Of course, there are obligations of the state-owned media still. KBC still has programs that should be accurate and impartial and must effectively inform voters about the voting process. Now, this not only applies to KBC, it applies to all media houses. However, being a public utility, it stands right at the top. Of course, the role of vernacular media stations also run by the government suffices right here, and I'll take you a few. Check the abuse of community and vernacular platforms, provide objective and fair coverage of all parties and, of course, the candidates, and they are also obliged to desist from using the platforms to vilify politicians and their opponents. Finally, let's take you about the role of the media regulators, and I wish we had. But before then, let's talk about the other roles of vernacular media stations, because they're public, especially under KBC, adhere to the Code of Conduct for the Practice of Journalism, Programming, Code for Broadcasting Services in Kenya. That's right at the top. It's a must. Ensure platforms are not used to spread hate speech and incitement. Role of vernacular stations and enforcement enforce compliance with Code of Conduct and the Programming Code of Broadcasters, defend media freedom at all time, ensure practitioners have knowledge and tools to report effectively. Now, those are some of the roles of the vernacular stations now, and the role of the regulators. We'll be telling you a lot more much later, because we still have pages and pages of the role of the media in relation to elections. But I'll be speaking to Victor Bwire, who's already seated. You can see him on the other side. He's waiting for our discussion to begin. But first, it is 274 days to the August 9th 2022 general election. That's precisely about 9 months to the day, and the season where the Fourth Estate finds itself at the center of the heightened political temperatures. Already a section of the political class has started leveling accusations on some media outlets, calling on their supporters to boycott them, ultimately putting journalists' safety on the line. Now, today, our senior political affairs reporter, Jeff Kirui, looks back at the instances where journalists have had to shoulder the burden of political contests and resulting clashes after the contest, and what it could portend for the 2022 general elections.
In the run-up to the general elections, campaigns heighten and political temperatures show, and journalists always find themselves at the center of the mayhem. August 12, 2017, KTN journalists Duncan Haemba and David Otieno were arrested in Kibera while covering post-election protests that broke out after President Uhuru Kenyatta was declared the winner of the presidential polls. The two were taken into police custody over the possession of bulletproof gear. However, they were later released without any charges. The arrests coming at the time the government was keen on muzzling the media against airing the protest live on national television.
They did not expect any media house to go live. So I suspect our being there was the reason why they had to arrest us, so that we go off air. Remember that with us, we had the end user certificate, we had the importation license.
The state attempts clearly violating the constitution that guarantees freedom of the media under Article 34 that prohibits interference on dissemination of information by any medium. In October of the same year, after the results of the repeat elections, Citizen TV journalist Francis Gashuri and NTV's Jane Gatwiri were assaulted when goons invaded a meeting called by the National Super Alliance at the Wiper headquarters in Nairobi. The NASA supporters violently protesting their dissatisfaction over the manner the stations relayed results from the 290 polling stations during the repeat presidential election in which President Uhuru Kenyatta was declared the winner.
That should not be tolerated. We have the Media Council, for instance, they came up with the Boards and Complaints Commission. If you have any issue against a particular media house or a journalist, you can be able to take your complaints there, and those investigations can be carried out.
Media Council of Kenya says media houses need to take a more proactive role in ensuring the safety of journalists, even as the council engages key stakeholders.
Ensure that there are working partnerships between the council and the National Police Service and other media associations to ensure that you have what we call security dialogues, regular security dialogues, to ensure that the police understand the work of the media, the public understands the work of the media, and therefore they are able to work as partners.
All stakeholders need to ensure that any attempts to suppress, muzzle the media should be fought by all means necessary.
MCK notably raising concerns that journalists who are victims rarely report to the investigative agencies to enable follow-up of the cases to conclusion.
Journalists themselves and media houses have a responsibility to ensure that these cases are reported to the police as a first thing, because if you've been attacked and you need justice, you know that it's only the police who can do the investigations, and then you can call upon institutions like the Media Council of Kenya, the Kenya Editors Guild, the Kenya Union of Journalists, and other players in the Kenya Media Sector Working Group, so that then we all rally behind these efforts.
And as the 2022 polls approaches, the media is finding itself in the all-familiar territory. The political class already finding fault in media houses, even some calling for boycott. The Election Observation Group National Coordinator Mule Musau saying this could ultimately affect the election processes.
Level of believability in terms of agencies in the country, the media houses rank among the highest. It's what Kenyans are listening to. So when we are seeing frog-marching journalists, or when we are seeing, fighting or speaking very ill about certain media houses, it doesn't augur very well with the public in terms of the public perception. So you're fighting one of the authorities that bring about confidence in an election. So that is not something that should be tolerated.
Jeff Kirui, KTN News.
A good place to begin our discussion this evening on KIVUMBI 2022. Victor Bwire, I call him Victor Bwire, from Director of Training and Development at the Media Council of Kenya, joins me on the roundtable tonight on KIVUMBI 2022. Good to see you, Victor.
Pleasure.
Very important indeed. Let me begin with where we left. At the center of Article 34 of the Constitution, a whole page given to freedom of the media. Very important. We'll not go to that deeply, but it will form substance of our discussion tonight. Let me begin on what we are facing currently as a build-up to the general election. A lot of politicians have already begun calling for boycott of media houses. Apart from that, they are already targeting specific journalists and calling them names and saying they are not impartial and all that. Does this concern you as a trainer of journalists? Does it make sense that every election cycle, just before the election, this one has to happen?
It concerns me. Thanks, Ken, and pleasure. One of the things that concerns me and the council largely is the insincerity by some of those guys, because they would want to editorially influence media, and whenever media that covers something in a way that is factual, that does not seem to favor them, then media becomes the bashing place. But when media carries a story that seems to favor them, and we belong to some of these, or some of them, the people who are very loud, and calling back is an accountability measure. If it's a genuine feedback to the media that they mess, then that's acceptable. But if it's just media bashing, hating, and cheap propaganda against some brands or against some particular journalists, then it's very unfortunate and unacceptable.
Okay. Because it looks as though it's a target. The other day they were calling on boycott of Citizen. They called on boycott of another station. They called on the boycott of individuals hosting shows. So it looks like they're targeting the media. And this is just because of the election. There's no other reason.
And that's why I'm saying, Ken, that is very unfortunate. Yeah. Because as you are aware, media ownership in this country is free. I mean, all people, businessmen who can afford and can run a media houses. And what surprises people is that there's no evidence. While people will make noise and say because of association, they will say because, for example, KTN is associated with Gideon Moi, it will favor him. You know those things. But when we go to our media monitoring system and check, because we do media monitoring on a daily basis, and look at the time allocated, volume, timing, and all that, you find that those noises are substantial. Some people come and say, so-and-so was on a particular radio station, insulted me, so-and-so. You go back to the master tape, check, and see, even that person they are claiming to have been insulting is not there. Even that show they are talking about was not on that radio show that particular day. So there's a lot of dishonesty, especially among very senior politicians who would expect it otherwise. But you see, when they cheapen, like my colleague said, cheapen the work of a very important institution like this, it becomes worrying because there are already structures. Even Article 34 that you quote, if you checked on 2 sections 2, there are limitations to press freedom. So press freedom is not unlimited, and the Act specifies where these limitations
can be limited.
And it has provided a redress. There is a Media Council Complaints Commission. There's the Multimedia Tribunal. We still have defamation. We still have all the insult laws in our laws. So if you genuinely feel that somebody is biased, a journalist was biased against you, then there are procedures that you can use to genuinely pursue what you think. But when it becomes just purely media bashing, media hating, cheapening, you see the insincerity in the whole thing.
There are occasions that the media bashing and what you call editorially influence the media has happened when the state, the national government, has taken it upon itself to curtail what the media can do and the media cannot do. The role of the media and the role of the state, the media being the fourth estate, I would assume it's intertwined. It's a symbiotic relationship that is complementary. Yes. And yet, there are those occasions that the national government has had an upper hand against the media, and we've seen that happening in 2017.
Well, what you notice gradually, that sometimes it's purely individual public officers. It's not an official government policy to curtail or harass media. But individuals, Ken, the way you are here, you are hosting me, the way you talk to me may be different the way somebody else might talk. So there are obviously individual public officers who, many of them old school, who have never appreciated the new constitution in terms of the freedom it comes with. And when you raise some of these things, they become very difficult. But there's no government policy per se, nationally, to say government will harass media, government will. In fact, if you looked at the statistics of many of the recent attacks against the media, you'd start noticing that unlike the Kanu days, you'll find a lot of attacks and harassment of journalists is by either county governments, criminal gangs, political activists. It's no longer national government per se, as it were. So there are trends that are emerging which we need to deal with. And I saw you projecting the global ranking of Kenya. Obviously, ranking-wise, we have been going down globally.
So we're a step down.
Yes, Reporters Without Borders, the other. And it's a challenge. The good thing, you understand, as a lawyer, you understand some of these things. Because the tools they use to gauge freedom of expression in countries, both the Reporters Without Borders tool and other tools, they use the legal system of a country. The tool just captures how many laws are there in Kenya that's curtail press, how many, how many cases. So sometimes you saw like this year, Ethiopia did better than us.
Yes,
I mean,
exactly.
and everywhere, I mean, so you get surprised. Yes, why would this happen?
Yes.
But you remember Ethiopia, when the Prime Minister came on, he did a lot of media-related reforms. I mean, deleting a lot of outdated laws about it. So yes, in terms of their ranking, they went up. But Kenya, while we have what's called 34, as you mentioned, but we nearly have nearly 20 laws that are anti-press freedom. Yeah. And you can remember Official Secrets Act, I mean, KBC Act. There are quite a number. I mean, under most of the national security laws, like KDF Act, Kenya National Police Service Act, I mean, National State Intelligence Act, yes, Prevention of Terrorism Act. You can name them. We still have the Books and Newspaper Act of 1972. You wonder what that do in our constitution. We still have defamation in our law books. So even if they are not applied, but once the tool is used and they check, say, Kenya has nearly 20 laws.
That determines
then we just
the ranking,
go down,
the global ranking.
And that's the discussion Media Council has been having with obviously our government, which has been very accepted in the ministry, that we need to harmonize and delete some of these laws that are in our certain books. They are rarely used. When was the Books and Newspaper Act, for example, used? It has never been used. Exactly. But it's there in our act.
It still exists.
It still exists. So why criminal defamation, was removed, but you saw even the computer cybercrime, it was nearly 29 sections removed, but they were reinstated. You remember the Security Amendment Act 2014 again had a lot of
very acrimonious.
So you see, some of those things make us berated. While in practice, we seem to be one of the countries with the most
free, especially in the region.
In the region. So we have nearly 230 radio stations, 135 TV stations, nearly 100 publications. By in almost all our 47 counties, nearly every county has a radio
station.
It's very impressive. But when you now go to our legal system,
that is where the elephant is in the room. Yeah. All right, I'd like to talk to you about that once you're given that freedom and enshrined in the Constitution, forget about the enabling laws that surround that freedom under Article 24. There is quite some responsibility for the media. So I'm taking a short break. When we come back, we'd like to look at the responsibility of the media generally, the fourth estate generally, to the citizens, to the politicians, to the nation largely. What that entails, and where we fall short, you have to call us out. We take a break. We'll be back with KIVUMBI 2022 in a bit.